Hi guys, Drea with Aloha Plant Life here, and today we're heading into video number 3 of the little Watering 101 video series that I've been putting together for you guys. Today's video is for those of you who fall in the overwatering category. As I mentioned in the previous video, people typically fall into two categories. You're either a chronic underwaterer or you're a chronic overwaterer. And these videos are going to help us to try to get into that sweet spot where we're not perfect, but we are watering more appropriately more often than not. I have always fallen into the tendency to overwater. Why do we overwater? A lot of it can be like fear of underwatering. I think that's a big one, especially for new plant parents, is you're just afraid you haven't watered your plant enough. But a lot of it also comes down to like misinformation from online, because there's these videos and things that you go out there and you read, and these people aren't experts and they're telling you should have to water your plant once a week. Always water your plants once a week. There's some plants I don't water for a month. It just depends on the plant. And that's the important thing, is learning your plants and understanding what each type of plant needs. But all that misinformation out there can cause problems. And there's another reason it can cause problems, which I'll get into in a second. But I also think that we have a tendency to overreact to changes in our plants, or at least that was the case for me when I first got into plants. Any little thing that went wrong, I was like, oh my God, maybe I need to water it. Oh, maybe I need to do this. Oh, maybe I need to do that. So we need to kind of not, I don't even know if I would call that helicoptering, being a helicopter plant parent, but we need to just kind of back off kind of sometimes and let them just do their thing. So, little things may happen, and it's not a sign of anything underwatering or overwatering. For example, I have my Calathea orbifolia here, and Calathea typically will get crispy leaves on the edges based on, like I mentioned in the first video, the type of water you're using can cause it. But also right now I have really low humidity in this house, and so it's getting crunchy leaf tips. And back in the day, I probably would have looked at that and been like, oh my God, I need to water my plant. No, I don't need to water my plant. This plant is perfectly fine. It got watered a few days ago. It's great. So that's kind of the things that I have found that typically cause people to overwater. And the other thing is, in regards to that online misinformation, a lot of what you read online will make you think that you have underwatered your plant, because a lot of the signs and symptoms are very similar between the two. I mentioned that bit in the underwatering video, and we're going to go into it in some more in depth in this video as well. But first, let's back it up a little bit and talk about what overwatering is. What does overwatering really mean? Now, in the underwatering video, I mentioned that there's two types of underwatering. The one that we talk about most frequently was going too far in between watering your plant from the last time you watered it. But then I also mentioned that not giving your plant enough water at the watering point when you actually water it is another type of underwatering. In overwatering, really, it's only that first thing. Overwatering typically is going to be, you watered your plant here, and then you came over here and you watered it again before it really needed it, and now it's been overwatered. The amount of water that you're giving your plant, you can't really give it too much, especially if you're using pots with drainage holes, which you 100% should be doing, especially if you are an overwaterer. Chronic overwatering does not mix well with pots without drainage holes. But if you're watering a plant in a pot with drainage holes, you could pour a whole gallon of water in a 4-inch pot. It's just going to drain. The excess that it doesn't need is going to drain out the bottom. So the amount of water you're giving it does not apply in overwatering situations. It's about the frequency. Now, there can also be an issue with soil. If your plant is not in the right type of soil and that soil is retaining too much moisture, that can cause a problem because it just never allows it to dry out as quickly as it needs to. But once again, that has nothing to do with how much water you're putting into the pot. So it is important to make sure that you're using the appropriate types of soil. There will be a whole nother video for you guys in the future on that. And also making sure your soil has good drainage and you're in a pot with drainage holes. Those are some of the key things. But before we get more into that kind of thing and how to resolve overwatering and move towards more appropriate watering, let's talk about the signs and the symptoms. Unfortunately, a lot of these signs and symptoms are similar to the underwatering, but there's some key differences. The first, and once again, it's different from plant to plant. As I mentioned in the underwatering video, some plants show certain signs of underwatering like more quickly than another plant, and some of them won't show one of the signs at all, whereas the other plant will. So it depends plant to plant. But if you're seeing one or more of these, you're going to have a good idea that something's potentially going wrong with that plant. So yellowing leaves is kind of the big one for me here, and yellowing leaves can be seen on your underwatering, but as I mentioned in that video, those leaves are typically going to be dry and crispy. An overwatered plant is going to be getting yellow leaves, and typically they're going to be soft. If it's soft and yellow, something weird's going on. And as I mentioned in other videos, plants do shed leaves from time to time, but that would be an older leaf. Typically in overwatering situations, it's not just going to be older leaves that are going to be looking yellow and soft. You're going to be seeing it on newer leaves. That is a red flag for sure. If you have new growth that is turning yellow and falling off and is soft, chances are you've overwatered. Other things to look out for are brown or black spots on the leaf. Black spot actually is a disease that affects plants that is quite often triggered by overwatering. If those brown or black spots have a yellow halo around them, that is another really good sign that you have overwatered. Typically, that kind of thing, when you're seeing that, it's a fungal infection of sorts, but can also be bacterial. That is typically coming from the soil being too wet. It's causing these fungal infections, these bacterial infections. But the good news is there are things you can do for it, and we will be getting into that here in a little bit. The other thing to look out for are your roots. So if you slip your plant out of your pot, if you suspect something weird's going on, you slip it out. If those roots look brown or black or are mushy to the touch, if you barely touch them and they split apart, that's a really good sign that you've got root rot. And root rot is caused by overwatering. Root rot also has a very distinctive bad odor. So if your plant smells funny, out of nowhere, like if it doesn't just smell like wet soil, that's another good sign that there might be something going on there and that you've overwatered. If you could actually see any kind of mold or fungus on your soil surface, or if you slip it out of the pot and you can see it in the bottom, that's also another good sign that you have overwatered. One of the worst signs that you can probably have happen, because at this point there's probably no recovering the plant, is if your stems are mushy and they're looking a little brownish or blackish and they're just popping off of the plant. That's definitely a sign that you have overwatered, and the worst case scenario out of that is if the base of the plant is doing that and it's gone brown and it's gone mushy. Unfortunately, I do not have any treatments that are going to help your plant recover from that. If you have anything healthy up above that you can propagate, if it's a plant that can be propagated, that would be the time to do so. If any of those things, if you're seeing any of those things and you touch the soil and the soil is wet, you know you have overwatered. I didn't really touch much in the underwatering video about touching the soil and if it's dry. I know it's kind of obvious, but those signs in conjunction with the soil will obviously be bone dry in the underwatering situations. In the overwatering situations, people typically will kind of talk themselves out of the fact that the soil is too wet. So now what do you do when you're in this situation? Let's talk first about how we're going to address it when it happens, and then we'll talk about what steps do we take moving forward to prevent it from happening again. So I have a series of plant rescue videos that I've been working on. I have already put one up for treating root issues. So that is up there for you to watch. I would definitely go watch that more thoroughly to get the full process on how to treat a root rot situation. So if you have root rot, it can be treated. You're basically going to treat it with hydrogen peroxide water bath, and you're going to repot it up in new soil. So go watch that video for the full process. Also, if you have those brown or black spots with that yellow halo, that's also, like I said, could be bacterial, could be fungal. Most of the time you're going to lean towards it being fungal. So you wouldn't necessarily need to do that full wash down I'm talking about, but you can water your plant with that same mix, and it will help to sterilize what's in the soil and take care of some of that problem. In conjunction with that, I would also give the plant a thorough spray down with a fungicide all over the leaves, top and bottom, to help stop it from spreading and to help just stop it in general. Also, it would be a good idea to remove any of the really bad leaves so that it doesn't spread to other leaves. When you're doing that, you're going to want to make sure you wear gloves, and you're going to want to immediately throw away those leaves, keep them away from your other plants, thoroughly wash your hands, thoroughly clean your snips before you do anything with any other plants. Also would be a good idea to isolate that plant away. But you can continue to treat with that fungicide like I said, water with that hydrogen peroxide mix, and it can help clear it up. If you're at that mushy stem phase, once again, I'm sorry, I have no advice for you on that. I really wish I did, but there's not much you can do there. But the number one thing that you guys need to do if your plant has been overwatered is let it dry out. Even in that hydrogen peroxide, the hydrogen peroxide watering situation, I wouldn't actually do that. I would treat the leaves with the fungicide, but I wouldn't actually water it with that mix until I've let the plant dry out. The root rot situation, you don't need to wait for it to dry out. Go straight into that treatment that I outlined in that other video and proceed forward from there. But if it's minor, just let it dry out. And I mean, let it get really dry. Wait until you see the symptoms I discuss in the underwatering video, the specific symptoms that are not related or similar to the overwatering symptoms. Once you see that, then you can move forward and try to get back, water it again, try to get into a better watering habit. So what can you do moving forward to not be an overwaterer? That's the next big question. Well, for starters, always check the soil. Use your finger, moisture meters, and don't fall prey to that. I'll explain why in a future video, but they can give you misreadings. Your finger will not give you a misreading. Also, I feel like it helps if you have plants in nursery pots and you just put them in another pot as a cover pot. This is actually a bad example because I don't have this one in a nursery pot in a cover pot. But I do have my Tenanthe over here. So my Tenanthe sits inside of a ceramic pot so that you don't see the ugly nursery pot. But the nice thing about having the nursery pot is I can spill dirt everywhere. Yeah. I can look at the bottom of the plant and I can see if the bottom of the plant's looking wet still. If it looks really, really wet, if I'm questioning, you know, okay, well, maybe it needs to be watered. I've got my finger in there. I think I'm an inch down. It still feels, I think it feels dry, but you know, the plant still feels kind of heavy, which is another thing. Get used to how much your plants weigh. This plant needs to be watered, so it's feeling really light. Once you water it, it's going to feel heavier. Once you start to figure that out, you can sometimes just pick up a plant and know, oh, it's still heavy enough, it doesn't need to be watered. But really, if we're trying to learn to get to that stage, you need to do kind of all of these things. So pick it up. Does it feel light? Does it feel heavy? Stick your finger in there. Try to get it at least 2 inches in if you can. Does it feel dry 2 inches down? Okay, then maybe we need to water it if it's feeling light and it feels dry. If you look at the bottom and the soil is starting to look lighter in color and it's feeling dry, then it's time to water it. Also, you need to keep in mind, like I said, about the different types of plants. So these prayer plants, like this Tenanthe, this Calathea, they like to be more on the moist side. They like to be watered evenly throughout, and then they don't want to get super dry. They don't want to dry all the way out like a succulent would. So I definitely would water these when it gets that top 1 to 2 inches, depending on the size of the pot, mind you, because if this was a giant pot, the top 2 inches could be dry, but there's still a ton of water in the bottom. So the bigger the pot gets, the further down you need to feel with your finger to feel how, if it's dry, further down than you would in this tiny pot. So keep that in mind, check it, and if it needs to be watered, it needs to be watered. You're good to go. We're not gonna have any of those signs or symptoms, and we'll know that we're moving forward correctly. Plants like Hoyas, plants like succulents, as I mentioned, they wanna dry out completely. So that's another good case in which you can look at the bottom, you can feel some drainage holes. These are big enough for me to put my finger on. I can feel if it's dry. On those plants, if it's totally dry, then I'm going in and I'm watering, you know? And I mentioned too in the underwatering video some other tips and tricks for you to be able to check those plants that like to dry completely out. So make sure you go check out that video too. But those are the basic things that you're gonna need to learn to do. Checking that weight, putting your finger in there. If you're really not sure, slip the plant out because you'll be able to see how much of the soil is dry if you slip it out of its pot. But you really need to get to the level where you're not constantly having to take your plants out of their pants, as it were. Set her back aside. But those are the things that you really can do to check on it. And you'll get there, you guys. It's not impossible. I lean towards overwatering, and I have had plants that I have partially overwatered. I have been able to save all of them. Fortunately, I've caught it soon enough to where I didn't have that mushy stem issue or mushy base issue that I talked about. But it can be taken care of, and you can get to that happy watering stage. As I mentioned in the underwatering video, another good thing if you are able to do it, if you don't just have too many plants, you can keep a log of when you've watered your plants. That'll give you a little bit of a better idea. Also, keep in mind that if you feel like your plant's not drying out at the level it should, maybe it's not in the right type of soil, as I mentioned before, but also check where it is in your house, because maybe it's not in enough light. If it's not using up the water very quickly, usually that's two of the key signs, is that you either have it in a bad location, that's not enough light for it to be actually using the water up at the level and rate it needs to, or it's just not in the right kind of soil for it if it's not drying out quick enough. And we will cover soil and the appropriate soil types for various plants in future videos. But I hope this has been helpful to you guys. Our next two videos coming up are going to be plants that are perfect for the chronic underwaterers and plants that are perfect for the chronic overwaterers. So hopefully that will be helpful as well. That is another thing you can do if you're a chronic overwaterer, is to make sure you're only bringing plants into your home that actually like excessive amounts of water and are more tolerant to having more frequent waterings. So thank you again for joining me, you guys. And if you have not yet clicked that like and subscribe button down below, please do so, and I will see you again next time. Aloha!